This is Intelligence Matters, sponsored by Ginkgo Biosecurity, whose cutting-edge biological intelligence platform empowers national security decision-makers to identify and respond to emerging biological threats.
Alex Wang is the founder and CEO of Scale AI, a leading AI data foundry, driving some of the most significant advancements in artificial intelligence today, spanning autonomous vehicles, defense applications, and generative AI. Alex started Scale AI in 2016 as a 19-year-old MIT student. Under his leadership, the company has grown into a market leader, serving clients from the U.S. Department of Defense to Microsoft, Meta, and OpenAI. Alex joins us today to discuss his journey as a pioneer in AI, the evolving role of data in driving AI innovation, and the implications of AI for national security. We'll be right back with Alex Wang. Biosecurity matters. What's biosecurity? It's the mission-critical industry safeguarding against 21st century biological threats. Biology doesn't respect borders. Ginkgo Biosecurity monitors critical assets and produces actionable biointelligence for national security decision-makers confronting biological threats, whether they are natural, accidental, or malicious. Ginkgo's technology tracks deadly pathogens worldwide, and our globally scaled platform, the first of its kind, detects outbreaks in near real time, deploys AI-powered threat assessments, and identifies the source of a threat, mitigating outbreaks before they become national emergencies. When lives and livelihoods are on the line, every second counts. Ginkgo Biosecurity, the biosecurity partner for an uncertain new era. Learn more at biosecuritymatters.com. Alex, welcome to Intelligence Matters. Hey, listen, before we start, let's sort of level set with everybody. And I've heard you in the past sort of talk about the three pillars of AI. And then, of course, Scale AI, your company, fits into one of those. So can you just lay that out for everyone so make sure we're all sort of on the same sheet as we go along?
Yeah, so artificial intelligence, or AI, has been a pretty modern, well, the field itself has existed for a long time, but modern AI using neural networks and sort of the new tech trend has been basically since 2011 or 2012. And it relies on three fundamental pillars: data, compute, and algorithms. So data is the raw material for intelligence. Data is what the AI needs to learn from. That's where Scale plays, and that's where we play. Compute are the large, all the computational power, all the supercomputers, all of the very advanced GPUs and chips that need to go into actually crunching all the data as well as processing all the information for AI systems. That's where NVIDIA and others have been incredibly pivotal. And then there's the models, which are the algorithmic techniques used to actually sort of take compute and data together and turn them into intelligence. And those are developed by, the major AI labs that everybody knows: OpenAI, Anthropic, Google's DeepMind, Meta, and other major companies. And so these three ingredients, or three pillars, really are the basis for everything in AI is built on top of these three pillars: models, data, and compute. And one of the reasons why we've seen such incredibly fast progress in AI over the past few years is that there's been really meaningful innovation across every single one of these pillars. So computational power, we've invested far more, built much larger data centers than we've ever built in the past, as well as the chips themselves have gotten better due to Moore's law. So compute has advanced pretty dramatically. On the algorithmic side, there was breakthroughs in 2017. We had the transformer model, which is a pretty meaningful breakthrough, and progress basically has continued recently, the O1 style of breakthrough. So we've continued to have sort of like algorithmic breakthroughs. And then data has also continued to sort of advance pretty dramatically from a technological perspective. We started out by leveraging all of the data off the internet. We kind of ran out of all of that data. Now we're sort of onto more complex and more advanced data types, complex reasoning data, agent data, other forms of data. And so all of the progress that you see up here on AI is fundamentally driven by progress within each of the pillars.
So Alex, let's sort of just talk broadly here about the state of AI. And just recently, I saw this chart, this graph. It's by the tech firm Gartner, and they named it after themselves, the Gartner hype cycle. You might have seen this graph. And for our listeners, it sort of shows a steep ramp up to what they call peak of inflated expectations. Then it leads to something called a trough of disillusionment. It finally leads back up to the plateau of productivity. So I know it's a little tongue-in-cheek, but if you're thinking of that model, because I'm sure you've seen it, so where are we today with AI? Are we at inflated expectations, or have we not even gotten there yet? Or are we past it?
We are probably somewhere in between. We're in this early phase. We're not quite at the trough because I think expectations are obviously still quite high. And there's an argument that AI as a technology may skip the trough of disillusionment because the progress within the field is just so fast. I mean, it's very, usually new disruptive technologies sort of toil in relative obscurity for some time, but AI has, become the number one focus for the largest companies in the world, largest countries in the world. I mean, it is by many metrics the most critical technology of today. And so there's a theory that the sort of just the sheer amount of investment, smart people, and then by force of will sort of will kind of skip a trough of disillusionment. But it's undeniable that the expectations are very high right now.
Given that as background, Alex, let's take a look at, we're looking at the AI landscape, but let's sort of look at it in particular at how it may reshape national security, right? Because that's typically what we talk about on the podcast here. And I realize, looking out 10 years is sort of crazy because it's hard to predict what's going to happen in, 5 years. But if you look out into that sort of 5-year time period and you're thinking about the national security challenges that all of us can sort of come up with, how do you broadly see AI reshaping that?
So I grew up in Los Alamos, New Mexico, the birthplace of the atomic bomb, the home of the Manhattan Project. Both my parents worked as physicists at the National Lab. And so I grew up, really deeply well studied on the sort of story of the atomic bomb, the sort of core scientific discovery, and then how that played out in national security in the world thereafter. And nuclear fission is a very interesting parallel because nuclear fission as a technology or as a scientific discovery is obviously this incredibly brilliant scientific discovery. And there was this fork in the road of two applications. One is, cheap energy for the world. And the other direction was for weapons, for bombs. And I think what we've seen over the past, 80 years or so is that the path to commercialization of nuclear energy has been somewhat embroiled due to there being, various sorts of risks and, the regulatory path's not been very clear and environmental concerns, all of that. But the application towards weaponry and national security has been immense. Both the United States and Russia and other countries, we all have large nuclear arsenals. We certainly have more than enough nuclear weapons in the world to sort of create a nuclear Armageddon and make the Earth inhospitable. And so I look at this what had happened, and then obviously the sort of the world, the national security community had to sort of had basically been working quite hard to ensure that we never had to use those nuclear weapons for fear of sort of the escalation and the sort of damage to the world and to humanity. And I look at that sort of arc or that story, and I think, you have to take the lesson and think about what's going to happen to AI. So, artificial intelligence is a dual use technology. There's an application towards the economy and towards, commercial applications of the technology. And then there's undeniably military and national security applications of the technology. And it's very clear that the United States, we have our eyes on these use cases, but our adversaries do as well. The application of AI and autonomy in Ukraine, for example, is undeniable by both sides, by both the Ukrainians and the Russians. And so it's this technology that I expect undeniably is going to be quite central to the national security strategies of every country globally. Like it's clearly going to be where most countries and most militaries and intelligence communities sort of look to gain advantage over competitors or over adversaries. And the applications are going to be pretty widespread. Like as a technology, it's much more general purpose than nuclear fission was. So nuclear fission, you build warheads or you build bombs. But AI, you can use it for offensive cyber hacking, or offensive and defensive cyber. You can use it for autonomous drones and autonomous weaponry. You can use it as a tool for bioweaponry. That's certainly like a concerning potential vector. You can use it for all your back office functions and make it, so you're dramatically better at planning. The application towards intelligence is pretty clear. Like this process of converting data to intelligence is something that AI is potentially going to be very good at. And so the applications are endless, but what I think is undeniable is that as a new technology with so much potential, it is going to be a cornerstone element to national security strategies globally and will be one of the major elements that will dictate which militaries or which countries have advantages over other countries.
So this is an interesting parallel that you drew on here a minute ago, Alex. And let me ask, what do you see as some of the most pressing risks posed by our increased reliance on AI? And if I think about your parallel, one of the key themes of the last Cold War was this mutual assured destruction, which, today maybe people think is crazy, but, it was a pillar, let's say, of that time period. Do you see any parallel there? Maybe not that extreme, of course, but can we draw that out a little more?
Yeah, totally. I think that deterrence theory in an AI paradigm is, this is the central thing to look at. And one of the things that I've always thought about that is important is like, how would the issue is we don't know, we don't have all the answers about AI yet. We don't know what are the exact properties of the technology when we get towards super intelligence or very advanced AI systems. So things that we don't know. One, we don't know if AI will require a huge amount of computational power to build and even to use, or if you're going to be able to use a relatively small amount of computing power to leverage the capabilities. Maybe you need a lot of computational power to produce advanced AI, but then you need relatively little to actually utilize it. That has very wide-ranging implications because if AI is something that only the biggest countries can utilize, then that is a much safer world than if anybody in the world can get a handful of GPUs and utilize the technology. Another big question that we don't know is it going to be possible to build safeguards into the models themselves to prevent misuse or use for harmful areas like bioweaponry or building nuclear capabilities or building other forms of weapons? Or is that something that is like technically impossible to safeguard and therefore adversaries are going to be able to remove those safeguards very easily? Terrorists are going to be able to remove those safeguards very easily and then utilize it for those dangerous capabilities. So there's all these questions about what are the end state facts about AI as a technology. And depending on those end state facts, you have very different dynamics. So one version of the world is that there's something very close to mutually assured destruction. This version of the world looks something like, let's say advanced AI both takes huge amounts of computational power to produce, to develop, as well as huge amounts of computational power to utilize. In this scenario, the United States and China, potentially Russia, and other countries will be leaders. And I think there will be some level of natural stability because, the leaders all know the power of the technology. By and large, they're not really trying, they know the other leaders are quite powerful. And so there's some level of sort of mutually assured destruction or some level of stability. Another world that gets much more complicated is one where it's a very proliferated technology. And every country has access to powerful AI. Every terrorist organization has access to powerful AI. And in that case, it's a much more complicated world, because even if you're the United States or you're one of these major countries, it's hard to stamp out all the potential misuse or all the potential sort of chaos ensued by the technology. The last point I'll bring up is this question of first strike. So mutually assured destruction is a good paradigm, because if you launch a nuke, as soon as other people know that you're launching the nuke, they can launch their nukes. And so it's very, very, very difficult to have first strike to be able to prevent sort of this mutually
unattributable first strike, right? That's what you're saying?
Yeah. Sorry. Undetectable first strike. The issue is AI as a technology doesn't seem to have those characteristics. Like, it seems like it seems potentially possible you can utilize artificial intelligence and in a as a weapon in a negative way without it being as attributable or detectable in the same way. And then two, there's an argument that, if my AI is 100 times smarter than my adversary's AI, they won't be able to retaliate. They won't even be able to retaliate. Like, my AI will just sort of, swiftly dominate my adversary's AI. So long story short, I think that it's a very complicated picture, and it is not obvious to me that we necessarily have the same sort of deterrence theory of mutually assured destruction or whatnot. And we may not, we can't know, I think, until we learn more about the technology.
It's really interesting parallels, Alex. Even in your first parallel, it's the purview of, great powers kind of thing. Even nuclear weapons, that monopoly didn't last all that long if you look at it on a time scale, right?
Yeah.
And so these kind of things tend to leak out. So what do you, as we just started to talk about some of the risks, what do you think, or maybe how should we think about mitigating some of the risks of adversarial AI? Deep fakes, some of the malicious use you talked about. So it seems like it's this constant trying to stay ahead of somebody else's AI, right? So you make your AI better, theirs becomes better, and so on and so forth. So it's less of a race than it is I guess, because a race has an end, and this doesn't at least appear to me to have an end.
Yeah, it is an industry with constant one-upsmanship. I mean, it's very relevant. So literally today, OpenAI 2 months ago released their O1 model, which was the sort of like this very advanced reasoning model. And then 2 months later, the very first replication of this technology came out of DeepSeek, which is a Chinese startup. And DeepSeek is choosing to open source it globally, or open source the technology. So this is notable for two main reasons. The first is that, one, China is very clearly competent and competitive, and was the first public replication of the most advanced technology in the United States, which is you have to take that data point very seriously. And the second is, this is now open sourced, and just as we were talking about before, the proliferation environment, it seems like there's a real proliferation sort of prerogative or mandate driven by the sort of private market incentives. And so on the answer of risks, well, I think that my framework on this is, so there clearly in the abstract are ways in which AI can be incredibly damaging and incredibly harmful to humanity. And so the key is that we have very accurate measurement. AI is actually pretty close to being very dangerous for bioweaponry, but maybe it's nowhere close to being useful for nuclear weapons, for example. Or what are the areas in which, from a practical standpoint, AI actually poses any real risk? And we need to be extremely good at this measurement process, this test and evaluation process, for all of the AIs that we see pop up globally, so that we can properly tackle the risks. Because what's been clear is that, the sort of very generic concern that powerful AIs are really dangerous, and so we need to be really careful. The general argument is pretty uncompelling, because I think people can use these systems and see how flawed they are. But we need specific conversations. We need a specific conversation that, these AI models are pretty close to, some dangerous capability, and so we need to manage it. We've been working at scale. We're proud to work pretty closely with the Pentagon and the DoD within their Chief Digital and Artificial Intelligence Office to actually produce sort of a test and evaluation framework for the use of LLMs in national security, in defense and military in particular, to be able to have accurate and reasonable measurements of the risks associated with the technology. We're in the process of scaling that to commercial use as well. So we produced our SEAL evaluations, where we'll evaluate in kind of the same way as Consumer Reports maybe does for most other products or technologies, a public evaluation of all of the models and their sort of various capabilities, including in areas like agent safety or other dangerous capabilities. But I think that we need to keep going on this, and I certainly encourage other people aid us in this process of actually having very, very accurate measurement to mitigate risks.
So, this sort of leads into this point about how the U.S. can maintain a competitive advantage in AI. We're the world leaders today, right? And you can tell me I'm wrong about that, but I think we are. So developing AI, but also ensuring responsible use, right? It's not a Wild West scenario, which may be the case in other countries. So how do you think we strike that balance?
We are lucky that the U.S. is the leader indisputably, and we have. And this is due to the benefit of our incredible system. A lot of AI research was funded by the private sector, has been funded for decades by the public sector. And that industry has attracted huge amounts of commercial capital, as well as the best and brightest people in the world. And we've been able to produce and create, the largest data centers of the world are being built in the United States. The smartest people are in the United States. The most advanced data for these systems is being produced in the United States. So we have every reason to maintain the advantage, but competitors are quite close on the chase. So, as I mentioned, DeepSeek replicated OpenAI's models. Alibaba, a Chinese company, released a new model Qwen, which by some metrics is actually the top LLM in the world. So according to Hugging Face's open LLM leaderboard, is actually outperforms many Western counterparts. And so fundamentally, I think the United States is in we have a very tight rope to walk, which is that on the one hand, we have global adversaries who are catching up and we need to stay ahead of. That's undeniable. The United States needs to stay ahead. But on the other hand, because we are the leaders, it is up to us to a certain extent to really set the right guardrails and set the right standards for how this technology should develop in a safe manner. And luckily, because so much of the progress in other countries is due to almost pure replication of what the United States does, we develop in a direction and build regulation or are thoughtful about building in a direction that mitigates some of the risks, then we actually can be in a pretty good spot as a country. So, and set the world up for this new technology in a good way. No specific answer there, but I think it's an incredibly hard question. And I don't think the answer is necessarily accelerate at all costs, but it's probably to leverage our leadership position to thoughtfully set the standards for the world.
So that's a great lead into the next question I was going to raise, Alex, and that's the role of government regulation, for lack of a better way to put it. So what role should the U.S. government play in regulating AI development, but also making sure that we stay ahead, as you just described? Clearly, there's a role here. Where do you think the left and right boundaries are?
I think the most critical piece. There's a few pieces that I view as hands down absolutely critical, which are one, ensuring integration into our national security community. So we have all this incredible commercial technology. It needs to get integrated into the DoD and IC very, very rapidly. That's kind of immensely important. And I think the second is also ensuring that we have, kind of as I mentioned, we have the right measurement mechanisms and schemes to ensure that we are cognizant of when AI capabilities are at a point where they create real societal level risks or around bioweaponry, nuclear weaponry, stuff like that. That I think those are very clear. I think that the additional, if you get further from that, I mean, I think you can have a lot of debate about what regulations are needed or important or what's important after that. I think one perspective, which I really I admire and I appreciate, is hey, we have to ensure that we stay ahead. So there's the use of regulation to accelerate the ability to build out large data centers, to enable sort of a Manhattan Project like build out of capacity in the United States. That certainly seems important. Other things are in ensuring that, I do think the guardrails that we set around the technology are going to be important as it continues becoming more powerful. So we need a thoughtful approach to both. But the national security stuff and the measurement of national security related capabilities are table stakes in my view.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with Alex Wang.
Beacon Global Strategies is the premier national security advisory firm. Beacon works side by side with leading companies to help them understand national security policy, geopolitical risk, global technology policy, and federal procurement trends. Beacon's insight gives business leaders the decision advantage. Founded in 2013, Beacon develops and supports the execution of bespoke strategies to mitigate business risk, drive growth, and navigate a complex geopolitical environment. With a bipartisan team and decades of experience, Beacon provides a global perspective to help clients tackle their toughest challenges.
Alex, what do you see as the role here for international cooperation in order to help sort of develop some of these, some of these guidelines? There seems to be a place here for like-minded nations, right? It's not everyone's going to participate, but how do you see that developing?
Absolutely critical. I think that the entire world, is going to be safer, stronger, friendlier if, the United States is in the driver's seat in ensuring that there's international cooperation and that the stakes here are so high fundamentally. I think I was listening to a podcast by a sort of war historian who said that, wars are won by great alliances more than anything else. I don't know specifically that's true, but I think in this case it's pretty true, which is that the AI is a large-scale, humanity-level infrastructure and scientific project. And as we embark on it, we want to ensure that we have the right levels of international cooperation. So relevantly, today in San Francisco, there's a convening of the Global AI Safety Institutes. So many countries now, the United States, the UK, Japan, many countries have established AI safety institutes and are convening and sort of collaborating on ensuring that each of these countries has sort of the right guardrails in place to ensure that we mitigate the sort of like negative risks. I think that's a great step in the right direction. I think that there's probably more to do. There's probably deeper collaborations at higher and higher levels of government coalitions. And so I think it's absolutely necessary.
So Alex, something triggered when you said humanity level. And so you don't see a AI winter, I guess, coming again, right? I mean, that's been the history. Look, when I was getting my graduate degree in computer science in the dark ages, AI was just around the corner. The claim was that you could just almost touch it and feel it. And of course, nothing happened for a long time. So you don't see this, AI winter. You just see this progressing. The slope of the curve, we could probably debate what that would look like, but you don't really see a downturn, right?
It's a complicated question because the answer is yes and no. I think pure scaling, which is what has been the sort of technical calling card of AI for the past few years, which is all we need is more and bigger data centers and more data, and the thing will just get smarter. I think this sort of like pure scaling approach is hitting limits. There's some winter associated with that approach, but at the same time, there's totally new approaches like post-training, test-time compute, and other new technical approaches which seem to have very high ceilings as a technology. So there's one way to put this is going back to the pillar analogy at the start. One of the beauties of AI is because there's these three pillars, compute, data, and algorithms. If you hit roadblocks in some of them, let's say we hit a roadblock in compute or a roadblock in data, then you still can work on the others. And so as long as one of these pillars is humming and driving progress, we're going to see continual progress in AI systems.
One of the big issues, especially when you think, well, I guess in a lot of applications, but when you think about national security for AI, that's sort of three things: transparency, accountability, explainability, right? And can we get to, I mean, right now you've got, and maybe you believe this too, that AI does things that people can't quite explain, or how did it do that? How did it come to that conclusion? Which, creates a challenge in a lot of fields, but in particular, national security. So how do you see that shaping?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is really important for national security use cases is a fundamental level of, transparency and explainability. So in all of the systems that we've built for the national security community, like the DoD and others, we have had an approach which all claims need to be backed up by grounded and verifiable information, and those sources need to be sort of cited and sourced and tied with all the claims. Because obviously, if you don't have this verifiability, then we have bigger problems. And so that's been pretty critical and core to our approach, which I think has enabled our system, Scale Donovan, to have much greater impact than some other AI systems where these guarantees weren't there. Looking forward, I think the technology is actually moving in direction of greater transparency and explainability. With the new thinking models or the new reasoning models, you can actually just, the model tells you what it's thinking. And there have been cases where we've found the models will even say when it's trying to be deceptive. Like it'll tell you when it's trying to be deceptive.
Admits it. Yeah.
It admits it. So the industry is moving in a direction of like greater transparency or greater explainability, which is good. But I think many people's greatest fear, and I probably share this, is we hook AI systems up to very powerful weapon systems and they make decisions that are totally inexplicable. And I think we're going to avoid that for what it's worth. I don't think that's like a real near-term risk, but I think we need more progress in this direction for sure.
Yeah, there's probably not a near-term risk for the U.S., but others may be, more willing to allow that to happen, right?
100%, yeah.
So since you sit, on top of this big data pillar, and the fact that, these huge amounts of data have now been ingested, how do we ensure security and privacy of sensitive information? Particularly when it has, there's, personal privacy, but particularly when it has national security implications, right? You need to have as much data as possible. The more, the better. Like you just explained a few moments ago. But is there a way we can ensure the security of that information?
Yes, this is possible. I think that there's, the AI industry has gotten potentially a bad reputation because in some cases, some of the most prominent actors are a little bit loose with how they work with data. But I think, there's no fundamental reason why AI and rigorous standards around data security and privacy are fundamentally at odds. So, for example, in our work with government work, we're authorized at FedRAMP High. We comply with all the necessary sort of data security authorizations. And then we employ these pretty deeply in our methods for how we develop this technology for national security use cases. So I think it's important. And I think probably what's more important than anything is that we ensure that for all national security purposes, we're doing things right and properly. And I think that's very much feasible and possible.
So Alex, as we sort of just, again, sort of look a little bit forward and the implications of AI for geopolitics, we'll sort of call it that. What are the emerging, we just talked about this inference capability, but what are the emerging technologies that you believe will have the AI, emerging technologies, that you think will have the greatest impact on national security?
I think that there's a few tranches. I think the first is obviously AI, and then AI applied to every field. So AI applied to cyber capabilities, AI applied to greater levels of autonomy, AI applied to biology and chemistry and medicine, AI applied to advanced manufacturing. So you can peer down each of these threads and see just sort of like, I expect sort of 10x or greater improvements in each of these areas, which is going to be pretty incredible. But I would say specifically, if you think from a military standpoint, the use of AI that is quite fundamentally disruptive is in autonomy, and the replacement of manned systems to unmanned systems to autonomous systems to attritable autonomous systems, like that entire chain or sort of like progression pattern we're seeing basically play out in Ukraine. Or like, some folks have mentioned to me that basically the level of iteration and the fully autonomous systems that are going to be deployed either by the Ukrainians or the Russians are moving just incredibly quickly on the drone level. This flips military doctrine on its head a little bit because you have very different calculus, you have a very different reality, and all of a sudden you get to a point where the warfare becomes, and to some extent, somewhat definitely difficult to fully perceive and comprehend and control. And so autonomy is clearly one major theme, which I think is of concern. And then I think from an intelligence standpoint, I think that the world has to grapple with this sort of like new reality, certainly of open source intel. And there's just so much information out there. And how do we think about all of that? I mean, I think these clearly seem like the big themes that seem quite important.
So that's a great point, Alex. And if you think about it, not only from an intelligence, but if you're an analyst, almost of any kind, looking at data, whether it's, geopolitical data or whatever, it's becoming impossible to think about doing that without AI right next to you helping you. Because it's just the amount of information is so vast that there's just no way for a human being to go through it anymore, right?
Yep.
So, all right, let me ask you for a prediction. How far away are we from artificial general intelligence?
It's the challenge is it's so hard to define exactly what it is, but I do think we're sort of some small number of years, let's say under 5 years, from very powerful AI systems that will vastly outperform humans in many areas and still be somehow worse than humans in a host of other areas. I mean, in some sense, we already have them today, but I think that trend will continue. And over the next few years, we're going to see progressively, basically, we'll see systems that are better than humans at more things while still being worse than humans at others.
So, Alex, last question. Are you as worried as some AI luminaries, who warn against, a almost a apocalyptic future where AI takes over? I mean, if you listen to them, that's sort of the path that they're going down. Where do you come out on that?
I think that if you look at it, I think that there's with any discontinuous technology, there's obviously always a fair amount of risk. But the most complicated question is whether or not AI develops the ability to self-improve. And this, I think, is the core. I think when people have are some call it doomer or very concerned about AI risks and others aren't, I think the core question is, do they believe whether or not AI can self-improve? Because in a world where AI can't really self-improve, then I think risks are very manageable, right? Like, we're developing this technology, we'll know what the limits are. If we get to any point that's concerning, we'll be able to, stop it. That's a governable technology. If instead you get to a point where AI is meaningfully self-improving, which is clearly plausible, but we have not seen yet in a very real way. But if you get that, then you have this technology, this effectively this form of like digital life that evolves at a faster rate than humans do, and then you might get worried that natural selection might benefit the sort of AI systems versus the human systems. So I think that really is like where the question boils down to. That's kind of how I frame it. If we see real self-improvement out of AI models, I think we ought to we ought to really take a step back and think quite hard about the technology. In a paradigm where we still don't, then I think we need to be more worried about misuse and be more worried about, how will bad actors utilize this technology and what does that mean for humans?
Alex, that was a great discussion. Thanks so much. I mean, it was a lot to think about there, and thanks for taking the time to be on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I agree. Intelligence matters.
That was Alex Wang. I'm Andy McCreadis. Please join us next week for another episode of Intelligence Matters. And you can always reach us at intelligencematterspod@gmail.com.
Intelligence Matters is produced by Steve Dorsey with assistance from Ashley Berry. Intelligence Matters is a production of Beacon Global Strategies.